Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we're discussing part 2 of Robert Hoagland's case. But if you follow us on our socials or have been keeping up with the news, you'll know that there have been some rather large developments in this case over the past week. For those of you who may not be in the know, we'll keep our intro spoiler-free. And for everyone else, we still think you'll be interested to hear our conversation. With that being said, today's episode is our continued examination of the mysterious disappearance of Robert Hoagland. In last week's episode, we'd ended by discussing the fact that Hoagy had disappeared previously, albeit 20 years prior to when he went missing in 2013. Well, I think it's obvious that Hoagy didn't stay gone for long, and he returned back home to his family after about 3 weeks of being away. But I had mentioned how he'd gotten fired from this job he'd gotten in California, and I guess he felt particularly ashamed of himself and felt like he wasn't able to take care of his family. Obviously, it was so difficult for him to find a job, and now he had lost that job.
What better way to take care of your family than to just disappear for 3 weeks?
Well, I totally see why you would initially think that. So, according to the disappeared episode on this case, authorities now and back then felt as though he'd left for those 3 weeks to try and find ways to make extra money for his family. I don't know what he might have been doing, but in one way, he's trying to make money. He's trying to find a way to get some extra money and probably also clearing his head, taking a step back from all the stress he's feeling. But again, if somebody does that in their past, you don't know if they could potentially do it again.
I mean, I think it's safe to assume that there's a possibility that they do it again.
Of course, yeah. And it was stated, though, that he didn't really do a very good job of just vanishing into thin air because he took the family's car with him. He made a bunch of purchases with his credit cards. So authorities were like, okay, he's really easy to find. We know where he is,
right.
But, he's an adult. He can leave. But of course, we know he did come back. And then for almost 20 years, nothing ever happened like that again. So
yeah, I mean, you could think, oh, he had done this once before and he wasn't very good at it. So maybe now the next time that he does it, he learned from his mistakes from the first time.
Mm-hmm.
In 2013, people know more. It's like the age of technology, the internet and stuff. So if you're trying to plan something, you have more information available to you, more ways to do things.
Definitely.
But the fact that there were like thousands of dollars left in the safe at home.
Yeah.
And then he had only taken out $600 and he left his wallet and all that other stuff at home. You'd think that if he was going to run away, he would probably have planned a little bit more, had a little nest egg, or at least taken the money from the safe to do so. That way he could, fund himself on whatever adventure he decided to take.
Yeah.
So even though he had done this before previously, I would probably err on the side that this is not the case now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's older. He has an established family. His children are older. He was doing paralegal work for a friend. He was a real estate appraiser.
Yep.
So it seemed like he had, his shit together.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up because that's something that Lori said too, was that their life was just so different back in 94. They had young kids. They were struggling. They didn't have the kind of money that they have now. They didn't have a home base with, a house that they owned. And their lives were just so, so different. And that was one of the big sticking points for her was, sure, maybe he left then because he was feeling stressed or overwhelmed or ashamed or he felt like a failure. But now, why would he be feeling that way?
And why would he want to run away?
Yeah, that's a big thing. But of course, investigators can't completely discount the fact that he'd done this before. And it was mentioned in, I think it was the disappeared episode, that they considered that maybe the first time that he ran off was a, quote, dry run. But I will say that investigators did review both Hoagy's cell phone and bank records, and they found no activity after he left in 2013. So we know that that already is a huge difference compared to 1994. So even if that was a dry run, like, you would think that he would have had something else in place. Like, even say he had a burner phone or something, you know? I still think that they would have found something in his financial records or anything to indicate that he was going to do this.
To think that it was a dry run and then you're going to do it later. No, it seemed like this is a guy back in 94 that was struggling to support his family. Mm-hmm. He left everything behind, or they left everything behind, and traveled, across the country to try and start anew. It wasn't working out. There were all the stresses of that. That person, I would assume, is a totally different person than the one that's 20 years later.
For sure, yeah.
I don't know.
You have so much life experience. He had a steady job.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
I don't know. You can't rule anything out without a definitive answer at the end of this, but personally, I'm just leaving it on the back burner for the time being.
Makes sense.
So what's your opinion on this whole dry run thing then?
I don't necessarily agree with it. I think the time difference is just too much. And like Lori had said, their lives were so different, but I also know more than you know. So I can't for sure say yet what my theory is, but there's more here. Like I said, you're going to be ping-ponged. So who knows? Maybe you will lean more towards that, or you might go towards foul play. I don't know. I'm not going to reveal anything to you yet.
Okay.
So now, at this point, I want to go over several other things that investigators found out in the early days of their investigation. So there were a few things. First, apparently at some point prior to Hoagy's disappearance, he'd said something to one of his friends about how he wasn't happy with his job at the law firm and he was thinking about quitting. And I think he may have originally taken this job to just bring in some extra cash, but I'm not 100% sure, and I haven't heard any details about why he might have been unhappy there or if other things were going on that just kind of exacerbated those feelings. But I do know that he mentioned to his friend he wasn't happy, he might quit. Something else that was discovered had to do with Hoagy's computers, both his home computer as well as his computer at the law office. So Lori had given Hoagy's personal computer to authorities so they could review any recent internet searches and anything else that may have been on it in terms of finding any leads to work. However, according to the disappeared episode, authorities found something frustrating on Hoagy's home computer. Apparently, just about a month prior to his disappearance, a program had been installed which pretty much just deleted all internet searches. It's unclear exactly what the program was, what it was called, or honestly what the purpose of it being on his computer was, obviously outside of it wiping his search history. And the lead investigator, Lieutenant Robinson, did mention something to the producers of Disappeared about how this could have just been, quote, routine maintenance, or that Hoagy could have put this on his computer to specifically clean all the search history from it. And I would assume that if he'd done this purposefully, that it was likely to create this exact scenario where now he's missing, potentially of his own accord, and investigators wouldn't be able to locate him based on the things he'd searched recently.
Yeah, that's definitely a potential. Also thinking of it on like a lower level than this grand scheme, was he up to something that he wanted to hide from Lori that maybe she would find on his computer if he didn't wipe his history?
Possible. Good
That's
point.
something that I was thinking.
Yeah, that I'm not sure. Also, after this, investigators got to work on his work computer as well, the one at the law firm. And I do believe after they had looked at the home computer, they found that obviously all the search history was wiped. They were likely considering, okay, let's check the work computer now. Maybe, there's more info on there. And interestingly, investigators stated that they'd found a specific address in Rhode Island that he'd searched a fair few times on his work computer. But I have not been able to find what that address was, so I couldn't look into it for myself, but authorities did state that the address was thoroughly investigated and they came up with absolutely nothing from that lead.
And it didn't have anything to do with his other job as a real estate appraiser?
That's a good point. That is not something that I would have thought about. Mm-hmm. Because obviously you would think if he's appraising a property, I don't know if he was licensed in Rhode Island, though. That would have been a good question to ask. Yeah,
just thinking if he's investigating other properties and he is a real estate appraiser.
Yep.
Was he registered or licensed in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, as many people in the area are?
Yes, definitely. That's a good point. Maybe that's all it was. Or maybe it was something, that initially police thought could be weird. And then as they looked into it, they were like, oh, he appraised this house. Yeah. And maybe that's why the lead went nowhere.
All right.
Now's about the time in the investigation when we're going to discuss the people of interest and or suspects category. And in order to get to the people of interest, we need to circle back again to a few days prior to when Hoagy went missing.
Am I right in assuming that Max is on this list?
You are right.
All right.
Yes.
The reason I'm saying that is oftentimes we talk about spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, family members, things like that. We know that Max is embroiled in this in some way already. He must be a person of interest in this case at this time.
We'll get to that. Early on in reporting on this case, there were comments regarding this ominous Bridgeport lead. Now, when I first began my research, I thought it had something to do with the fact that Max had been found in the VW Gulf in Bridgeport in this seedy drug area. Well, I was mistaken. Well, I guess not necessarily mistaken, but there's a lot more to the Bridgeport lead than I initially expected. And I did just want to mention, too, that I believe this whole story I'm about to tell you was uncovered for one of two reasons. First, because authorities most likely felt as though Max needed to be looked into, as he was the last person to see his father prior to his disappearance, and you can't discount his drug addiction and prior criminal record either in terms of authorities wanting to look at him. But I do also know that Lori was aware of this situation as well, but I just can't tell if the story came from Max himself when investigators interviewed him, or if the whole thing was put out publicly after piecing together Max and Lori's side to this story. But either way, we already know that Max had his struggles with drugs, and we also know that his parents were doing their best to help him, but they were also hiding things from him in hopes that he wouldn't try and steal money or valuable items to then in turn buy drugs with. Well, I guess Lori had 2 laptops, and those 2 computers were belongings of the Hoaglands that they were worried Max might attempt to steal. You could probably get a fair bit of money for those. So, as with multiple other things, Hoagy hid the 2 computers, but he hid them in the family's car, of all places. And I assume that he thought Max just wouldn't find them because they always hid the keys from him so he couldn't take the car without permission. But either way, something happened, and somehow, some way, Max ended up finding the car keys that were hidden and took the car that the laptops were kept in. And I do believe this all happened when Hoagy was asleep at some point in the week or so prior to when he went missing. So when Max left the house in the car with the laptops, I guess he was heading to a location in Bridgeport that was this abandoned building that was said to be an old Remington firearms building. And this was a place that Max frequented relatively regularly, as it's been stated that he would strip metal from this building and potentially other abandoned buildings in the area to sell and in turn buy drugs with the money from the metal that he sold.
So, not to interrupt you, but if he had been known to strip metal, usually like copper and aluminum and stuff like that from these abandoned buildings, is that also in the general place where he was found with the vehicle? And maybe if he had been convicted of stealing from this business, along with that conviction comes a no trespass order.
Maybe.
And maybe he was there when they found the car, and then they were like, hey, you're not supposed to be here because you just got convicted of this.
That makes sense,
If that were the case. That makes more sense as far as the whole trespassing order goes.
All right, cool. Well, I'm glad we were able to kind of nail that down a little bit more.
If that's accurate.
If it is, yeah. But I mean, I think
sense.
it's fair to assume.
Yeah, okay.
But anyway, when Max arrived to this abandoned building, he somehow figured out that the 2 laptops were in the car that he'd taken, and felt as though he needed to bring the computers into the building and hide them because he was worried that someone would try and steal them from the vehicle if he were to just leave them in there.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so that was my thought too, but let's keep going, get the full story.
I'm thinking that these laptops were either hidden under a seat or hidden in the compartment where your spare tire and all of your tools would be to change it. And maybe he didn't think well ahead of time and he was going to this abandoned business to try and strip metal from the building. So he went back there looking for tools and was like, oh, wow.
Look what I found.
2 laptops here.
Yeah. Now, apparently this building was also a place where at least 2 of Max's buddies were squatting at the time. That was the terminology used. And I believe Max was going there to hang out with these friends and do whatever they were going to do. Also, these guys were described as associates as well. Just wanted to throw that out there.
I think anytime that somebody has a drug addiction and then they hang out with similar users, that's
like the common term.
Associates.
Okay,
yeah.
So after Max had hidden the computers, he went and hung out with these friends, and then when he went to go leave, he went back to this hiding spot to grab the laptops and bring them back home.
And they were gone.
And they were gone, yes.
Of course, these laptops were not safer in this hidden location in a vehicle.
Yes.
Instead of leaving them in a friggin' building with 2 other users.
Exactly. So that's why I just didn't understand, like, what was the reasoning behind bringing them into the building. I would think that they would be so much safer in the car.
They would have. I mean, I would personally think he was like, oh shit, I got this great score, 2 laptops. I'm going to bring it into my buddies and say, how much do you think we can get for these? You help me get rid of them. I'll give you a cut and then we can all be happy. Yeah,
I mean, that makes sense. And who knows how accurate this story is, if this is in fact what happened, or, you know, if he maybe just didn't want to, you know, be fully truthful and say, oh, I stole them and I sold them, or whatever happened.
Who knows what mindset he was into when he found the laptops? He could have been, you know, coming down or high at the time.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot more to it. So according to reporting and the disappeared episode on this case, Max then went home, confessed to his dad that he'd taken the car, and told him what happened with the laptops. And I can't quite tell if this all happened within the same day or if it was like over a couple days, but at some point after Max told his dad about this, he and Hoagy went back to this location in Bridgeport together so they could confront these guys and try and get the computers back. Because, of course, at least based on the story that Max is telling Hoagy, he believed that these associates or buddies of Max's had stolen these laptops.
I'm already assuming, and this is with no knowledge, but this is trying to come up with some type of idea. You know, you have Max taking the car while Hoagy's asleep. He's probably out doing whatever. By the time he comes home, Hoagy's probably awake, and he's like, what the fuck are you doing with my car?
Yeah, I bet.
You didn't, you know, I didn't give you permission to take it.
Yeah.
Then this whole story happens. Oh, I had some friends in the car. They found the laptops. They took them. We need to go back and get them. He's not going to come right out and say, oh, I took your car. I went to this place where I usually steal from, met up with some other known drug associates, found these laptops in the back of the vehicle, brought them in there to stash them because I thought they'd be safer there.
Yep.
And then whatever happened, happened.
Yeah.
You know, it's same thing with like the childlike mentality that we talked about in the previous episode when we were going over the beginning of the case. It's very unlikely that somebody is going to be totally truthful when they're suffering from addiction.
Yeah, I agree. Also, interestingly, Hoagy had apparently gone to this abandoned building with a lead pipe as a form of protection. And of course, when Hoagy and Max get there, the 2 guys tell them they had nothing to do with the laptops being stolen. They had no idea what they were talking about. They weren't involved, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't appear as though anyone was hurt, and this did just appear to be a verbal altercation. I assume he probably was like, listen, I don't know what could happen. I'm going to bring this lead pipe just in case. But from all accounts, based on how I've understood it, nothing like physical happened, and it was just maybe like a yell match about the computers.
Are these other people now persons of interest in Hoagy's case?
Well, so, I mean, I'm sure you're as intrigued as I was when I, you know, first heard about this whole situation and it being broken down, and authorities were just as intrigued.
Well, you think, like, he went there, obviously, with this metal pipe more for security and protection. But now you have these guys that are like, oh, he's coming here, he's taking these laptops from us, blah, blah, blah. This could have been a huge score for us. Or like,
he's coming here and he's threatening us.
Yeah,
you know, they could have seen it in that way. So yes, police were like, okay, all right, what are we going to do here? Obviously, a little skeptical, have to be, take it with a grain of salt. But they wanted to run down the lead for themselves, and they were like, you know what? I'm going to go find these guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lead to work.
Absolutely, which they do. They find the 2 guys that were associates of Max's, and this is finally where, you know, I've given you the background. Now we've moved on to people of interest. And authorities brought both of these men in. They interviewed them, asked them about the missing laptops. Again, they held firm. They said, absolutely not. We had nothing to do with the laptops. We did not touch them. We did not sell them. And of course, authorities aren't just going to take them at their word that nothing happened, that, you know, maybe they could have been involved in whatever happened to Hoagy. So these 2 guys, at least one of them, owned a van. And that van was searched and tested for any evidence to obviously indicate maybe there was a body, maybe there was blood. Are there fingerprints of Hoagy's, DNA of Hoagy's that could have been in there? But investigators came up with nothing. Van was perfectly clean, no indication that Hoagy or potentially a body was ever in it. And from what I can tell, investigators did rule out these two men as having involvement. Along with that, they also brought in cadaver dogs to search the abandoned building as well to confirm, even if it didn't happen in the van, obviously you would assume if maybe he had been killed in this building, they would have to transport him somehow because no one had ever found his body, but no indication of that was found in the building either.
Interesting. You know what this is kind of making me think of?
I just got to tell everyone though, John is so interested. Normally he's sitting back or chatting. He is leaned up in his chair. He is staring at me intensely. I am so interested in this story right now.
Well, maybe it just happens to be when you're telling me the story and what we're doing in our lives outside of the podcast.
Okay.
But we're watching The Sopranos now. We've never seen it before. The Sopranos. And we just watched the episode, so spoiler warning. We're only in season 1, but spoiler warning if anybody hasn't seen The Sopranos.
Skip forward
20 years later
30 seconds or a minute.
But somebody just got pinched.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're worried that he's wearing a wire.
Mm-hmm.
And then we learn that the person who brought this information to Tony owes this person a lot of money that he's trying to throw under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder, did Max owe these guys something, or was Max in over his head with these two other guys?
Mm-hmm.
And then he put the laptops there to try and, get Hoagy to go there and stir up some shit or something.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a very strange thing to say, oh, I'm going to leave these laptops there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he could have just said that, oh, I got carjacked and somebody stole the laptops.
Mm-hmm.
That's very odd to me.
But at the same time, you can look at the other side of the coin and say, maybe just in that moment, he was so overwhelmed and felt horrible because he knew that his parents were, doing their best to help him. And maybe he was like, I can't come up with a lie right now, and I'm just going to tell some version of the truth and maybe leave out pertinent details. Who knows? But I did just want to make mention, too, that the laptops that were allegedly stolen have never been recovered. They were never found. I don't know if, pawn shops or things like that were checked, but nothing ever came from that. No one ever found the laptops. So as John is questioning Max, I'm sure everybody listening is, and I understand it. And the lead investigator on the case did actually tell the producers of Disappeared that Max was, at one point, considered a person of interest. But he did say that Max was never a suspect in the case. And due to the fact that he'd been on their radar as a person of interest, of course, they had to continue to do their due diligence into looking into him, looking into his story, looking into the laptop situation, the altercation, all of that, right?
Right.
Makes sense.
It definitely makes sense, and I totally understand the distinction of naming him as a person of interest versus a suspect, because at no point did I think, or have I thought yet, that he is a suspect in his father's disappearance and maybe potential murder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking that from a person of interest standpoint, his actions may have been a factor in what happened to his father. Not directly, but indirectly.
Yes, I totally see what you're saying. And of course, that's exactly where investigators' minds are at. They're like, this is just, it's a wild story. This is a crazy situation. The fact that all of these things have now led up to this man going missing. Right. They are things to look into.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that anyone's placing blame in any way, just to say, this is odd, this is not normal.
Everything
we're
needs to
gonna
be
look
into.
at it. Exactly.
Right.
So, in terms of physical evidence and forensic testing that authorities did to confirm, if maybe Max had done something to his father or anything like that, because you can't completely rule it out, they actually tested all of the Hoagland's vehicles. And, obviously it's the same thing like it was with the van. They're trying to confirm, could there have been a body transported in this vehicle? Obviously, it's a family car. You're probably going to find some of Hoagy's DNA, fingerprints, things like that. But I think that it was more along the lines of, was there blood in here? Were there bodily fluids in here? Were there human remains?
Right. Or was there some type of chemical used to clean out this area?
Yes,
that wouldn't normally be used to clean a trunk per se.
Yeah. And I think something that's frustrating too, and in a way, I definitely feel bad for Max because so many people in the early days online were speculating about this case, and they were like, oh, well, what did Max do in the in-between on Sunday and Monday? Did he kill his dad and transport him in the car? And you're like, whoa. you've got no indication that
Right.
this kid did this right now.
Right.
Give him the benefit of the doubt until you hear anything from authorities.
Right. And it's also very easy to pile on to somebody that's suffering from addiction and say, oh, it definitely involves this person because this person's a drug addict.
Yeah,
or something
and
like
that's,
that.
I
When
think
it
that's
could
a lot of
totally-
it.
Yeah, and it could totally be, not even connected. So even though police may see him as a person of interest, it doesn't really mean that he has any connection to his father's disappearance at this point.
Yes.
It just means that it hasn't been ruled out yet.
Exactly.
But he's an easy target for people that don't know anything that just want to point the finger.
Super mean trolls online.
Yes, pretty
That's
much.
exactly what it is. But after investigating all the cars, doing the testing, nothing was found. No indication that would say, Hoagy was transported in here, there was a crime committed in this house or in these cars, nothing like that. So, obviously, first good check mark to say, all right, no indication on the cars. And on top of that, investigators also asked Max to take a polygraph test, to which he agreed and he passed. Of course, it's not impossible to trick a polygraph and pass even if you are guilty or vice versa, but something to note nonetheless. And something else interesting that the Newtown PD did in terms of investigating Max was that they had him make a written statement about, I believe, basically everything involving his dad's case, all the things that took place prior, and they sent that written statement off to the FBI for statement analysis. And based on the FBI's review of Max's written statement, they concluded that he was most likely telling the truth. And as of today, authorities do not believe that he was involved in whatever happened to his father, and he is no longer considered a person of interest in the case. So obviously, both the polygraph and the FBI statement analysis aren't exact sciences, but I have to assume that authorities looked totally into Max's entire life, his alibi, if he had one, like all of these things. And if they're coming to a conclusion on ruling him out, it's because they have a lack of evidence to show anything.
Right. And if they have nothing, and this is the only thing that they really have right now, they would cling to that the best that they could until they can totally rule it out. So if they have ruled it out, I think it's safe to say, take him off of the sheet covering all people involved.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think, it's one of those things where, of course, people will scrutinize an investigation and not always give police the benefit of the doubt. But in this case, this isn't a situation where police were like, oh, you have to wait 24 hours to report him missing. Oh, we're not going to take it seriously, even though, he's a 50-year-old adult and can do whatever he wants. They were like, all right, we believe this. We're getting in here. We put out a bolo. We're searching the rivers. We're searching the woods. We're bringing in cadaver dogs. They are doing everything that they can to find this man. So you would think that they're not just, willy-nilly throwing people of interest out the window like, I don't think you have involvement. They are working hard.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, so now, over the next several months after Hoagy vanished, there were actually quite a few sightings of men that greatly resembled him that police would need to look into.
I mean, he has a typical white guy face.
And he's bald, too. There's a lot of bald men.
He's white, he's got a big smile. I mean, you could probably see a lot of different people that resembled him.
Yeah, especially in our area. I feel like I've definitely seen people that look like him. I was like, wow, he looks oddly familiar, but maybe he just has one of those faces, But
right.
So the first sighting was sometime in early to mid-September of 2013, about a month and a half after Hoagy went missing. And this sighting of him was in the town of West Warwick in Rhode Island.
What the hell?
Yeah, so it was stated that a man carrying a large backpack who resembled Hoagy was seen walking along Route 117 near I-95 in West Warwick. But from what I can tell, it appears as though this individual was ruled out as having been Hoagy. But interesting, right? That it goes back earlier, and I know we kind of debunked the theory on the Rhode Island address, but now there's a sighting in Rhode Island?
Yeah.
That's kind of weird. You've got connections.
Yes, but also Connecticut touches Rhode Island. It's not like...
But I know more than you do. So there was actually another sighting in Rhode Island.
Providence?
No. This sighting was in late September of 2013, and a Department of Transportation crew working in West Greenwich spotted a man walking along Route 195 towards the Rhode Island-Connecticut border.
Interesting.
Yeah. Based on my research, I don't believe this person has ever been identified. No one knows if it could have been Hoagy, if it was just someone that looked like him. But due to the fact that there were these two sightings in Rhode Island, there was actually a lot of publicity in this little state about his disappearance.
So the West Greenwich sighting was after the West Warwick sighting?
Yeah.
Okay. So, because you're thinking, if you're coming from Connecticut, you're going to hit West Greenwich before you hit West Warwick.
Definitely.
So if he bypassed all the other locations in Rhode Island, got to West Warwick, and then he was seen in West Greenwich, was he trying to get back home?
That is a good point. Yeah, that was something that I was thinking of too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure.
So this DOT crew that saw him in West Greenwich, did they ever locate this male, and was he ruled out as well? Or is this just a sighting that could be Hoagy?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Do you think it was him?
I don't know. We'll get into that when we dive into theories in a little bit.
All right.
But West Greenwich wasn't the last sighting. There was another one of, again, a man that resembled Hoagy, either in late 2013 or early 2014. The reporting was a little confusing. I saw both mentioned, but either way, someone who looked similarly to him was seen in 2 locations in Connecticut. According to a Low HUD article from 2014, quote, in January, Hoagland was reported to have been seen in a Savers store in Brookfield, a town adjacent to Newtown and only a few miles from the New York border. A witness reported seeing Hoagland leave in a vehicle with New York state license plates, officials said. On Thursday, someone visiting an inmate at the Putnam County Correctional Facility told police he saw Hoagland walking into the building, Newtown police said, end quote.
Well, for somebody that left their entire life behind, Savers is a place that they would probably go to purchase clothing or something they may need.
And you would think if all he had on him might have been that $600, you're going to try and save every penny. Mm-hmm. Just a thought.
But he was seen going into a prison?
Yeah, so it was reported that there was surveillance outside the correctional facility. I mean, you would hope so, that there would be surveillance outside of a prison, but...
Was this a men's prison or a woman's prison?
Ooh, not sure. Good point. I don't know. But the man that was seen near or potentially even going into the prison was never identified. Nobody knows if it was Hoagy, if it was just someone that looked like him. And I think maybe the surveillance footage was grainy and, they couldn't determine.
Oh, come on. We're talking 2013, 2014.
Oh, John, you wait, because I'm about to show you some surveillance footage that royally pissed me off.
Oh, but we're talking a prison.
Yeah, I know. You would think
2013, 2014 prison, I feel
like even in 2022,
baby.
I feel like even in 2022, we've got shit surveillance footage. What is everybody doing? Can we just
on
upgrade
our Ring
it?
Cameras, we can see damn well.
Everybody just needs a Ring camera.
Yeah, well, if people aren't, investing into security systems that are at least as good as
a Ring,
which is not expensive at all.
No.
What the hell's going on in this world?
It's crazy. So, that other sighting, the one of the man who walked into the Savers store in Brookfield, there's surveillance video to review on that. And it was actually shown in the disappeared episode on this case. And investigators compared both the surveillance of Hoagy walking into the gas station the morning he vanished with the footage of this man walking into the Savers.
Did he look right at the camera and smile?
No. So, John, I'm going to show you the comparison now. And for everyone listening, you can watch the disappeared episode to see this footage on Amazon Prime or Investigation Discovery. But I think you might need to have a subscription to watch it. But you might be able to find it on a different site as well. So, John, I'm going to show you this clip from the disappeared episode now, okay?
All right. So, anybody interested in this case, I implore you to look at this video. It's on Prime? It's $1.99 for the episode or something?
Yeah, well worth it. I think so. It's a really good comprehensive rundown on his case.
So, again, this is a white male, partially balding. The surveillance footage in Savers is Savers level surveillance footage. Yeah. So I guess it's, store appropriate.
But it's so grainy.
It's so grainy, but there are particular things that you can make out from it that you can use to rule out or to solidify an idea on whether or not this is him.
Yeah.
And one of the things that his wife said was the gait was wrong. Mm-hmm. I don't believe it was him.
Yeah, it's the way he walked, the stride that he took with his legs, so different from the guy walking into the Savers.
The only difference or the only thing that you could think about if this was Hoagy and you were comparing his gait from the gas station where the original surveillance was taken when, prior to him going missing.
Yeah.
And then you have the Savers footage was he under the influence of alcohol and or drugs? That can change a gait. It can make it elongated. It can change it in characteristics that would make it look different from the way that you normally walk.
Yeah.
But without knowing that, I would say that this guy just looks like Hoagy, and it's not him.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. It seems like that's what his whole family thinks. And something that was so interesting to me that I feel like we never really talk about when it comes to missing people and potential sightings of them had to do with something that the Hoagland's oldest son said. So that was Chris. And in an article with the Connecticut Post, it states, quote, "As much as the Hoaglands appreciate the tips, Chris said he wishes someone would just grab him, grab his arm and say, 'You're missing, go home. Don't call, grab him,'" end quote.
Very interesting. That doesn't even, pop up in my head either.
Right? And I was like, that is so insightful, honestly. And it's just something so basic where you would say, oh yeah, I saw this man who I know has been missing for a year or whatever the time frame is at this point, and you're just going to call the police and this guy's getting into a car driving away. How are they ever going to find him? Chris is very right. You just, hey, I think you're this guy. You wait right here, sir.
Yes, but then you think about if it's not him,
yes.
And somebody's like, you accosted me, you kidnapped me, you held me hostage while we waited for the police.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of iffy, but I understand what he's saying.
Or like, hey, sir, can you hold on 1 second? I love your hat. Can I take a picture? Like if he was wearing a hat or something, just to try and get like definitive proof that it might be that person.
Right. Or if you just so happen to see, a report that this guy was missing and you're like, oh, Hoagy. And you see their reaction and you see if they turn around.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. But I understand Chris's sentiment. I don't think a lot of people, especially these days, would just hold somebody hostage and wait for the police to arrive.
I know I wouldn't. And as much as I totally understand where he's coming from, and it's such a good point to make, I would be like that. What were you saying earlier? Like 3 degrees of separation. Yep. Like I'm letting that I'm letting those 3 degrees be there, and I'm going to call and I'm not going to get involved.
Right.
But at least you're, letting authorities know, maybe we saw this guy. Here's a potential route he could have taken, whatever.
Right. I mean, if you know information and you think this is the guy, there are other ways to learn more information about them. You can shout out the Hoagy thing. You could, walk by them in the Savers and comment on something that they're looking for.
Or take a sneaky little pic as you walk by.
Yeah, and then send it over. And then, if you're really a sleuth, you wait until he leaves. You get the license plate and stuff like that, and direction of travel, all the good information. A lot of times, like when crimes occur or if there's a missing person or something like that, the best thing that you can do for police is to be a good witness.
Yes.
Get all the pertinent information, direction of travel, type of vehicle, the plate, just in case the plate doesn't match the vehicle.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to say it, even if you didn't. But I used to be one of those people who never identified cars. Like I couldn't tell what was what. And, I never looked at license plates. And I feel like as I've gotten older, as I've gotten more into this true crime world, that has completely shifted. And if anyone is even remotely doing something that stands out as out of the ordinary to me.
Or if they're driving poorly, you comment on it too.
I absolutely do. I'm like, you're a jerk and I'm going to remember your license plate for driving like that. That's just something that I think everybody listening is something that you should just start doing, is just keeping track of those things, because you truly never know what you're seeing out in the world that could be beneficial.
Yes.
Maybe it never comes to fruition. You know how many license plates I've taken down or thought about that nothing ever happened with it?
Right. But you remembered it, or you took it down, or you wrote it down, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's something I think, like, just from a life perspective now, we are so interconnected. We're attached to our phones. We can't go anywhere without them. We're always looking at it. We're texting while we're driving. We're listening to videos or watching videos while we're driving. All these things. Reduce that. Pay attention to your surroundings, because that can also save you, but it can also help you be a good witness if something were to happen.
Completely agree.
When your head's buried in your phone, whether you're driving or whether you're walking around or whatever, be aware of your surroundings.
Yep. Now, as far as I can tell, these were the last sightings I've heard about concerning Hoagy in the Connecticut or Rhode Island areas. But there was one more, I guess you'll call it a sighting, if you can feel my air quotes, that comes in later that we'll touch on in just a minute. And I did just want to note as well that within the first few months of Hoagy going missing, his family had created a Facebook page called Help Us Find Hoagy, but I haven't seen any activity on that since 2014. But now I want to fast forward to the 1-year anniversary of Hoagy's disappearance, and the family held a public paper lantern memorial for him in remembrance of him 1 year after he'd vanished. At this point, now at the 1-year mark, the investigation was pretty cold, with barely any leads coming in. So authorities had worked to put up billboards in the Bridgeport area in August of 2014, which those billboards were up for about a month. Now, investigators did clarify publicly why the billboards were placed in Bridgeport rather than Newtown, where Hoagy went missing from. And they stated, quote, "This Newtown area has been saturated with news media coverage and attention, and the Bridgeport area was one of the places Mr. Hoagland was known to have been and worked. That area has received less media saturation," end quote. And as of September 2014, once the billboards were removed, it's reported in a Newtown Bee article that the lead investigator, Lieutenant Robinson, stated, quote, "As of this point, we have only received one tip from the billboards. That tip was a dead end," end quote.
It's interesting to hear that Bridgeport received less media saturation when we know that Hoagy's car or Lori's car was found in Max's possession in that area, and it resulted in an arrest. We know that Hoagy was brought there to try and retrieve the 2 laptops, at least at one point.
Yep.
I mean, how do we know that? Again, this is just a question I have. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody or anything, but we know that Max at this point has been ruled out as a person of interest. But how do we know that Max and Hoagy didn't go back to Bridgeport that night and then Hoagy disappeared from Bridgeport?
We don't know that.
Exactly. We don't know that. So why would there not be media saturation in that area when we have multiple connections to Bridgeport?
Well,
seems strange.
At that point in 2014, though, the disappeared episode hadn't come out. There wasn't a ton of information. This man went missing from Newtown, and they were searching areas in Newtown. So, yes, they talked
he went
about
missing
this
from Newtown.
Yes, but they talked about this Bridgeport lead, but no one ever really knew what the Bridgeport lead was until I'm pretty sure the disappeared episode came out.
So, with everything that you know, do you think that there's anything in regards to the Bridgeport lead?
Potentially.
Okay, I mean,
I don't want to dive into the working through the theories just yet until we get through all the information we have, and then we can tackle the 3 different theories that go along with this case, and then I'll give you more of my opinion.
Okay, but do you agree that it's strange that there was not more media saturation, to coin that term?
Not necessarily. I really don't.
Really?
Yeah, because yes, people knew about Bridgeport and they knew that Max had been arrested there, but that was all I knew about Bridgeport. You remember when we started going over the whole Bridgeport lead portion, and I said when I first started researching this case, I was like, what is this ominous Bridgeport lead? Like, why do they keep saying, oh, this led them to Bridgeport? We didn't know that. And all I thought was like, what happened with Max that night? Like, was there something else that was going on around that area? But then later you find out about the whole thing with the associates and the laptops. So I don't think it's weird that it wasn't as publicized in Bridgeport.
Okay. And then to break that down just a little bit further, what do they mean by media saturation in Bridgeport particularly? Because they're both Connecticut. Like in Rhode Island, you watch, Channel 10 News, Channel 12 News, and it's all Rhode Island. So I assume that it's probably similar in Connecticut. What more media saturation would they want? Or what do you think they would want? Like missing posters in Bridgeport, or
so they had
door-to-door canvassing? Like, what are they looking for as far as media saturation?
Yeah, from what I understand, there were missing flyers in the Newtown area. And you have to think, so there are smaller newspapers within like certain counties and towns, and the Newtown Bee was so heavily saturated with articles on his case.
Makes sense.
So I think that's what they mean. Like the Newtown Bee journalists ran with this case.
So on a more local level.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And I think that's what he's talking about. Okay, so we're going to go back to what I said a minute ago about this additional sighting, again, with the air quotes. And this one was from the Myrtle Beach, South Carolina area.
Myrtle Beach?
Yeah.
Is it like a connection with Chris or something?
Yeah, so going back to what we talked about in last week's episode, Hoagy's son, Chris, had worked and lived in South Carolina before he moved back up to Connecticut to be closer to his mom after Hoagy disappeared. And because of the fact that Chris was living down there, the Hoaglands had visited South Carolina relatively often. And this tip or sighting, whatever you want to call it, came in stating that Hoagy was working as a chef in a restaurant in the Myrtle Beach area.
Okay, that kind of coincides with his previous work experience.
Exactly. So everything is matching up, right? You've got South Carolina with his son. He's a chef, or at least he has that culinary background. If he was going to go do that, his wife even said he loved to cook. if he were to just up and leave his life behind, she's like, that's probably what he'd be doing.
Yeah, that's at a minimum, if you're running away and you need something to fall back on.
Yes.
It's like, oh, you could be a fry cook at, a Chili's or something like that.
Yeah.
You could get a job fairly easily in the food services business.
Yes, agreed. So authorities took the lead seriously, and the Myrtle Beach PD went around showing Hoagy's picture to employees and patrons of different restaurants in the area to see if anyone had seen him. But like all other leads in this case, nothing came from that. And I did just want to mention that it was later revealed that this tip about Hoagy potentially being down there, I don't think was necessarily a legitimate sighting, hence why I've been using the air quotes.
Geez.
It came from a psychic.
Oh, yes. I see a man in front of a grill, and I see a beach and a Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He must be cooking in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Or the psychic was like, let me read the newspaper articles on this case. And oh, he was a chef. Oh, his son lived in South Carolina. What can I tell them that'll make them run down this lead?
Right.
That it'll seem kind of legitimate. But, there was never actually any physical, like someone, saw him with their own eyes down there, from what I understand anyway.
I don't know what it is. Something just popped into my head about, it must have been something I was dealing with at work or something I was talking about with a coworker and a psychic and stuff. I would just love to find a case where a psychic solves something.
Somebody commented on our Facebook about that. We'll have to look into what case that was that they mentioned and who the psychic was. Yeah. Because I'd love to know. I would love to look into a psychic and
it's weird
see
because
if they were legit.
Yeah, it's weird because I have family members who have gone to see, I don't know if they were a psychic or a psychic medium or something, but they knew information that they shouldn't have known.
Yeah.
Or would have been very difficult to know. So, I mean, you kind of believe that there's higher powers or people have some type of connection with the ether or something. But it just seems like every time that we talk about it from an investigation standpoint, like the psychics never work out.
Well, it seems like the reputable ones don't help with things like this.
Yeah, like Miss Cleo.
Exactly. Just like Miss Cleo. Call me now.
Call me now. It's so funny that you didn't know that.
Hey, speaking of, for everyone that would like to know more about Miss Cleo, so our friend Katie over at True Crime in the 50 podcast actually did an episode on Miss Cleo and all of the fraud that went along with that. And she actually told me about it after she listened to our Debbie Makel episode where we talked about Miss Cleo. She was like, oh my God, you'd never heard of Miss Cleo? And I was like, no, I haven't. And she was like, I did an episode on her. And I was like, shut up. And then I listened to her episode and I learned all these things. And I was like, what? I had no idea. Yeah, so I highly recommend listening to her episode on that because it was so interesting. I had never known any of that. And it's this wild, like, fraud conspiracy theory thing. And it's not even a conspiracy theory. It's legit. It was wild.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it was like the perfect time for her to do this because it was pre-big internet boom. And it was like perfect timing for her to pull her scams that she did.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Highly recommend. Go check out Katie at True Crime in the 50. Now, there were also comments about the belief that Hoagy could have also been in California, as we know that he had lived there back in 94. He had disappeared from there back in 94. And there were articles published that mentioned that he did have ties to multiple cities in California.
So if I were to run away, I've never been to California, but if I were to go somewhere and I didn't know what I was going to do and there was a chance where, I could be up Schitt's Creek for a while, I would be running to California. It's always friggin' warm.
Yes.
So I don't have to worry about, running away and then December comes and I'm freezing my freaking nuts off.
Yep.
On the East Coast or in Montana or something. California's a safe bet. It's pretty much always warm there.
Yep.
If you didn't have the best situation once you got there, it's not a bad place to be, crashing on the beach or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good point. But from what I can tell, there were actually never any legitimate sightings of anyone resembling Hoagy in those areas in California. And, for all we know, there could have been, but nothing was ever reported on. And I think it was just one of those things to blast out to the public to say, hey, he has ties to these areas. Keep an eye out.
Yeah, also, it doesn't seem like this was a hugely publicized national story.
No.
It was probably a local story. If Bridgeport didn't even have enough information for what some people thought they should.
Yep.
It's like, do you really think California
Well, it was
Is he gonna have
interesting
that
because
much?
when I first started looking into this case, I had found some articles from like LA and those areas, and I was like, am I looking at the wrong case? Like
Really?
this is Connecticut and Rhode Island. But yeah, like the LAPD like pushed out some press releases or like at least like written statements to say, hey, this guy's missing from Connecticut. He's got ties to these areas in California. And they pushed this out to the public, hoping that, maybe someone in California would see it, not just like
Interesting.
Connecticut newspapers putting out, oh, he's got ties to this area. They actually did it in California, which I thought was pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, due to the lack of leads coming in, Hoagie's family and friends did get some people together to do a deep dive into his financial background. And according to Disappeared's coverage of this case, they went back about 5 years to try and find anything. And nothing in his financial records indicated to them that he might have been planning to run away from his life. And one of Hoagie's friends mentioned to the producers of Disappeared that there were no large cash withdrawals that maybe made it seem like he was hoarding money and putting it aside somewhere that maybe wasn't, in the safe or anything like that.
You got to think, too, though, if somebody's planning something for a long time beforehand, they could have been stashing small quantities of money for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
But also, where would they have done it? Why would they have done it? If you're thinking about doing this, 4 years from now, what's going on 4 years prior to your disappearance that makes you want to disappear? It's a bit of a stretch to think that somebody had been planning this for an extended period of time before they run away.
Yeah, I agree. But something else that I wanted to touch on again is the $600 in cash that Hoagy had taken out. I think it was 3 days before he went missing. And I don't know the exact dates of the confrontation that took place with those other guys, but I would think that it probably happened prior to when he went to the bank. And I do feel like I remember this friend of Hoagie's in the Disappeared episode mentioning that he thought Hoagy could have potentially gone back to the abandoned
To
building.
buy the laptops?
Yes, so that he, could either buy them back or offer them money in place of them because, he felt bad that they were stolen. They weren't even his. They were his wife's. And, that was something, John, I'm pretty sure you brought that up. Like, could he and Max gone back again? Could Hoagy just have gone back to that location by himself? And I'm sure that's where investigators thought, hey, this is why we really need to look into these two guys. We want to check the building.
Right.
We want to check their van. But also, something that I thought about with that is, could he have found these guys in a different location?
I mean, I don't know. Do you think he's the type of guy that would confront these people if he saw them at the local supermarket?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. But I'm just wondering if the $600 wasn't, taken out for him to go run away from his life, that it was actually taken out to try and help his son in this scenario. Like, you got yourself into a little bit of a mess with these computers. Your mom's going to be really upset. What can I do to try and make the situation better? Let me take out some cash and try and, smooth things over with everybody.
Yeah, and if you look at it through Hoagie's perspective, these laptops, say they're work laptops or they're inexpensive laptops, in the 2013, 2014 era, you could usually get like an entry-level laptop for about $299, roughly. So, even if they were a little bit more expensive.
Of course, John knows this. You could get an entry-level laptop for
Well, I worked at Best Buy at this time.
I know, it's just funny.
Yeah, so I worked at Best Buy around this time, and most entry-level laptops are around $299. Then say it was a little bit more expensive from that, and you're just trying to get these back because they have information on them, and you just want to buy them back from
you're like, I have pictures of my family, or I have whatever.
Right, so to say, hey, I'm going to give you $600, that could be, retail value for these, because if you go pawn them, you're probably going to get $100.
Yeah.
I will buy these back from you. It makes sense that if he was trying to get 2 laptops back, and an entry-level laptop costs $300 at the time.
Yeah.
And most businesses usually provide their employees with, lower-end to entry-level laptops. That $600 price point could be a perfect amount to be buying back these 2 laptops.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. But there was something else that I wanted to bring up, so I want you to just bear with me for a second, but we're going to back up a little bit again. So we know that Lori had emailed Hoagy the day before she was supposed to be flying home from Turkey to confirm that he was going to be picking her up at the airport. Well, like John mentioned, roaming charges and all of those things, he was correct. And Lori and Hoagy were emailing back and forth pretty much the entire time she was on her trip. They were in relatively, constant communication. And Lori was made aware of the laptop scenario when it took place. Hoagy had sent this very upset email to her about how he did his best to try and hide the computers from Max, but something ended up happening, and now the computers are just gone.
What?
Yeah, so
Wow.
he told her.
So they were in constant contact, like you just said. They were like emailing back all the time, so it's even worse
That he
when
didn't
he didn't
answer.
respond.
Yeah, so then that makes me think, whatever happened did not happen on Monday. It happened on Sunday.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah. And we're going to touch on this in a minute when we go over theories, but there was a comment that someone on Reddit made regarding how this email from Hoagy to Lori about the laptops came off as him feeling like he'd failed his wife and his son in this instance. And we know that he disappeared due to feeling like a failure back in
Wow.
94. So, I mean, no, it's not the exact same situation, but it could be the exact same feeling,
Very interesting.
right?
I see why you said I'd be ping-ponged.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like I've landed on a theory, and we'll dive into that in a second. But I did want to say, just one more time about the whole thing about Hoagy potentially having runoff. And it goes back to what Lori said earlier about, and John said it too, and I, confirmed that Lori agreed with that, is that their lives were just so different those 20 years apart. And she really does not think that he would just up and leave his kids. He was a devoted father. And even the disappeared episode on this case is titled A Family Man. Like, he cared about his family so much. Why would he just walk away from them?
I guess I wonder, did he suffer from depression?
We're going to... I have a theory, and I don't want you to bring it up yet.
Okay, so the reason I ask that is because we know that almost 20 years prior, he was going through some stuff, and his way of dealing with it was to almost, go into himself, remove himself from his family life,
yes.
go out on his own.
Mm-hmm.
That's something where, somebody's not necessarily thinking of the overall picture.
Mm-hmm.
They're making a decision based on how they feel. Because if you're just thinking about yourself and how you feel, and you feel like a failure and you're not doing the best for everybody else, you don't necessarily grasp the gravity of you disappearing from somebody.
Yeah.
Your wife now has to take care of these 3 kids. Your 3 kids now wonder where their dad is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all that drama that goes along with you disappearing, it's like, no, I'm a burden on these people, so I'm going to leave.
Mm-hmm. When in
But no,
reality,
you're
you
making it
leaving is
worse.
more of the burden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if now he was in this same mindset where he's like, I'm failing my son. I can't get him clean. I'm trying to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I have lost the laptops that I had hidden to hopefully, prevent my son from being able to find them and stealing them.
Mm-hmm.
And he just gets back into this mindset. Man,
right?
I don't know.
It's a good point. So, also to go back to what you said about, how he's doing his best to help his son. He brought him back into his home, and he's, trying to keep him clean and do whatever he can that he's not getting back into drugs. And according to a piece in the Stamford Advocate, Lori stated, quote, "It was definitely a challenging situation, but not one so desperate that he'd just leave," Lori Hoagland said, adding she and her husband were completely in tandem about how to help their son, end quote.
If you had interviewed Lori almost 20 years prior, would she have said the same thing?
Yep.
Yes, we're struggling with money. Yes, he can't find a job. Would she have said the same exact thing
Mm-hmm.
about no, he wouldn't leave?
I don't know.
Man, I am ping-ponged.
I told you. So now, roughly several years after Hoagy went missing, there wasn't much additional media coverage until the disappeared episode was released in 2016. And like I've said several times, and I've referenced the episode a lot throughout our episode, is that there was just a lot of good info in it. There was so much detail that you weren't finding in other reporting on this case. And for everyone listening, I do think that, you should go, and if you have to spend the $1.99, or if you have an Investigation Discovery account, definitely take the 45 minutes to watch the episode, because it's really good to see everyone's face as they're talking. All of his friends, his family, I think it was a good episode.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially, even thinking about us with a podcast,
Yeah.
you don't really understand all of the emotion behind the words that are coming out.
Yes, agreed.
Without being able to see a face.
Yeah.
So I think that by seeing this episode, you probably gathered umpteen amounts more information about how somebody feels about something, aside from just reading reports and quotes that have been, published in whatever newspaper.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say, I don't know if any leads actually came in from the airing of the disappeared episode. I don't know. Maybe something came in. Maybe authorities were made aware of, another lead. But from what I can tell, nothing else really had been reported big in the case after that episode came out. Now, over the years, there has been a lot of talk online about this case, and I find it to be particularly odd that this was one that I really don't remember ever hearing about, considering we live in this general area. And again, like we said in the beginning, but shout out to Nicole for bringing it to my attention, because this was a wild ride, and there's like still more that we're going to be talking about. But I want to go over the big elephant in the room that is something that we really haven't touched on yet in this episode. And that has to do with where this took place. Newtown, Connecticut, which is where the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting took place in December of 2012. And that shooting happened only about 7 months prior to when Hoagy disappeared. You now have all the internet trolls and crazies coming out of the woodwork to spew this crazy conspiracy theory that Hoagy was involved, or that he had something to do with it, or that he knew something about it and was targeted and all this. And I was like,
yeah, I
who
mean,
would do that?
When you have such a huge story, like what happened with Sandy Hook, and everybody on the internet is focused in on this.
Yep.
And then barely 6 months later, 7 or 8 months later, you have this guy that goes missing. It's like people that should have no opinion on the matter come forward with the most outlandish of claims. And then when we talk about speculation, how it should be grounded in reality.
Yep.
These people are grounded in outer space. Like they're just saying whatever comes to mind without saying, is this really possible?
Yeah.
What other connections do we have to make this, stick?
Yeah.
No, they just
there are no
spew
connections other than, oh my God, it happened in the same town.
Right. They're just spewing whatever bullshit comes to their mind.
Exactly. And it was something that they talked about in the Disappeared episode. And again, this just goes back to like why I think you should watch it, because you can see the emotion on his family's faces, and to know that they're sitting here. They said there were like 30 pages of threads just talking about this crazy conspiracy theory and how they have to read this about their husband, their father, their loved one. That is just so beyond messed up. And it's like, these people really need to sit down and have a good old fucking think and say, if this were my dad, if this were my husband, if this were my brother, how would I feel hearing someone talk about them like this on the internet? You'd probably feel like shit. So you should really think twice before you put your crap opinions online.
Yeah, and I think that goes with like everything in general with the internet.
Yeah.
Whether you're commenting on somebody's picture, whether you're commenting on somebody's video, whatever, you really need to stop and think, hey, if I was putting out this content, what would I feel if somebody commented this on me? But yeah, in respect to this case, like imagine if it was your loved one that went missing and then somebody's like, oh yeah, he was involved in 9/11. He's the one that did this. It's like, really, guy?
That is just
what the
insane.
fuck are you talking about?
And like, you've got nothing else to ground that opinion in other than, oh, he lived close to the school. You know how many other people live close to the school?
Right. Everybody that lives close to the school.
It must be involved. Like, it's just insane. And I just felt so bad for this family. Like, obviously, they're already dealing with so much. So much. They have Max and his struggles. Now they have Hoagy going missing. And now you're going to talk crap about this loved one of these people and say that he must have been involved.
Screw everyone that perpetuated that theory, because that is totally nonsensical. And with all of that information coming out over the internet, Newtown police has never said, oh, we wonder if this guy disappeared because of his connection to the Sandy Hook shooting. No. Like, where the hell are you coming up with this? You're clearly pulling it out of your ass.
Exactly. But outside of that, of course, people have theorized about what could have happened to Hoagy, authorities included. So with that, we're going to dive into theories and work through each one. So the first theory, which I think I find to be the least likely, but John, I'd love to know your opinion, would be that Hoagy took his own life. And the first thing that comes to mind for me for this to not be the case is the fact that his body has never been found. But just to play devil's advocate to my own thought process, something that came to mind for me when I was looking into this theory was that maybe this was a mental health situation, which John had just brought up earlier about the potential of depression. Now, by no means am I a medical professional in any way, shape, or form, but there was something that I wanted to touch on about the blood pressure medication that Hoagy was taking. So I don't know what brand it was or the specific medication, but based on my little bit of research into the topic, it appears to me that some blood pressure medications are known as beta blockers. And I've seen conflicting information regarding beta blockers, but the potential that they could cause depression.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if maybe depending on the type of medication he was using, or for all I know, it couldn't have been the medication at all, but could this have been in some way a mental health crisis? And something happened from there, whether it be him maybe taking his own life or him leaving, because again, it goes back to that like feelings of failure and, being ashamed and those things. So
yeah, I think that if I had to hang my hat on something, I wouldn't immediately assume that he took his own life because you have to plan pretty meticulously for nobody to ever find you.
That is just the biggest hang up for me on it. But it also segues into the theory of him maybe just leaving.
Right, but if you are going to take your own life, that body is never moving once you do so.
Yes, exactly.
Versus running away. You are forever moving. I don't know. I think that if you had said earlier that there are 3 theories, and this is one of them, this has to be on the lowest rung of theories.
Yeah, and that's why I started with that theory. But I want to now touch on the next, which is that Hoagy could have ran away from his life. And what's interesting is that there's actually a man by the name of Richard Hoagland. So Robert and Richard, of course, you're going to be like, wow, those are really similar names with a very unique last name, I think. So this Richard Hoagland was from Indiana, and he vanished back in 1993, but was later found alive and well in Florida in 2016 after he'd basically stolen the identity of a dead man and was living with a brand new life with a new name. And I will tell you, a lot of people online mistake Hoagy for this Richard Hoagland guy. Like the amount of comments that I would see would be like, this guy was a piece of garbage who ran away from his family and did all this. And people are like, wrong Hoagland, you need to chill.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand the confusion because if you just, it's like looking up John Smith.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
Jon versus John Smith or something.
Exactly. So it's easy to confuse the two.
Yeah.
And if you're doing your research and you're not doing your due diligence where you're, comparing and contrasting between different sources and date of births and all of that stuff, it's easy to find somebody with the same name that maybe disappeared under similar circumstances that is absolutely not the same person that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think it just, this was just something else that just made me think more and more about the fact that someone can run away from their life and not be found for decades.
Vicky Lee Lamberton.
Exactly. Potentially, yeah. And I'm just very curious, how many other people think this theory is possible. I don't think you can completely discount it, but I'll tell you right now, this is not the theory I land on.
It's not necessarily the theory that I land on either, but I'm still not opposed to changing my opinion.
Yeah.
I will say that if somebody has a history of working in the culinary industry, that is a very easy career path to dive back into, get paid under the table at a little hole-in-the-wall place that nobody's ever going to know about you. Nobody's ever going to give your information out because they pay you under the table, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. That is like if I was, a good cook, I could very easily, I think, leave everything behind and go find a job somewhere because everybody always needs a cook.
Yes, I fully agree with that statement. But you have to think, if you're trying to leave your life behind, potentially start this whole new identity with maybe even a new name, would you take your wallet, passport, or anything to identify you? Maybe not.
You wouldn't.
But would you take cash? Would
you might take
clothing?
Cash.
Would you take shoes, John?
I mean, I don't know.
He doesn't even have a car.
I get that. But if you were planning on starting a new identity, why would you take anything with you that connects you to your old identity?
I agree. I do. But then I also think, too, and I go back to like we always say, you can't discount what the family's saying. And I think about what Lori has said, and I think about this situation with Max. He had this Appalachian Trail trip planned. He let his son back into his house when he knew he was still in trouble and he was trying to keep him clean and he was doing everything that he could. He loved his son so much. He was just letting everything else go out the window. And for all we know, he could have taken out that $600 to go help his son out and to also help his wife out He's a family guy. Like, why is he going to just up and leave them behind? I don't see it.
Because he feels like a failure.
Yes, but this is what I mean.
There are things, though. Picture this. You're like, okay, I'm going to get you out of this, Max. You withdraw the $600 and you buy the laptops, you bring them back, and then Max goes and does his own thing. If you suffer from depression.
Yeah, which is a possibility.
You're sitting in bed and you're like, I can't believe I did this. Like, I'm a failure. My son can't get clean. He just did this. He stole these laptops. He brought them back.
And maybe even blaming himself for it, too.
That's what I'm getting at. He's blaming himself. So there is a possibility he's like, I am no good to this family.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave. He had done it in the past. There's always the possibility that he could have done it now. And he has the skills and capability to get a job at every hole-in-the-wall place to never be seen or heard from again. Like, he could shave his head, grow a beard out, and then he won't look like the guy that we see in the surveillance footage.
Yeah. But I just want to now touch on the last theory, and that's that Hoagy might have met with foul play, which I think it's very fair to think that either him running away or him meeting with foul play are very possible. But I just think all of the indicators in the house, the lack of him having a car, the fact that he might not have even had shoes on, like, I don't know. I just go back and forth now. Like, I feel like John in some ways is like kind of changing my opinion a little bit here, but also it just doesn't make sense to me that you would leave all these things behind. And you can't forget either the blood pressure medication. Yes, I brought it up in regards to maybe it could cause depression or these other things. More often than not, people that need blood pressure medication have a serious issue with their blood pressure. So what happens if you're not taking that? Why would you not bring that with you?
Yes, and based on my previous statements, like, that does not mean that I don't agree that foul play could be a factor here.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And we don't know what happened. I would say that him running away is a possibility, but Hoagy being the victim of foul play is also a possibility. So we know that Max had given the laptops or had surrendered the laptops or left the laptops with these two other individuals. If these two other individuals were in possession of a firearm and they knew where Max lived, could they have gone to Hoagy's house, got him into a vehicle at gunpoint, and taken him somewhere? Yeah. Without evidence to debunk that, it's a possibility. But the only way that you can connect those two things, foul play and Hoagy's disappearance, at this point, appear to be the connection through Max.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. And something else that I just wanted to go back to in regards to him potentially, having run away from his life, you can't forget that program on the computer too, to remove search history. It's
tough. I mean, it's one of those things where I would really have to sit with all of this information out in front of me on paper, because again, I am like a tactile learner.
Yeah, we are not auditory learners over here.
So yeah, it's funny, like when I'm trying to come to a decision on something, you're saying, oh yeah, well this. Okay, I come to a decision now. But then you're like, oh, remember this I said, 45 minutes ago or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, he did wipe his personal computer. Like, why did he do that? But regardless of all of that, and regardless of what I think, you're the one that's done this research.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. I have a really hard time with this case, and I think this happens a lot when I do my research, because I'm alone in this. Like, it's literally just little old me doing my research, and I, sometimes just don't think of the things that John is thinking of. And that's why we, changed everything to this format so that John could have his opinions and interject them. And I feel like ever since we started doing it this way, my opinion is ever changing as we talk through this. And for me, initially, before we even sat down to record, I was on the foul play bandwagon. That was what I thought happened. But then as we've continued talking, I get that the family does not believe that he would walk away from his life. And I can't discount that either. And, just seeing the pain on their faces, knowing that their dad has, if they think so, like maybe potentially left them behind, that's just so hard for me to come to terms with. But I also just can't discount it at all. Like, I have to keep the potential that maybe he did leave in the back of my mind, which just sucks because like you would hope that wouldn't happen, but then you look and you see the comparison to that Richard Hoagland guy, and like someone has done it successfully. Don't get me wrong.
He's done before.
Yeah, it was 20 years before, but still, I don't know. Like I thought I had an answer for you, and I feel like now I don't.
Well, there's also the potential too that he did decide to up and leave. He left, and then something happened after that. That's
possible. Yeah, it definitely is. But the thing is, like, police can't track anything now because he doesn't have his cell phone. He doesn't have his credit cards. So even if he did leave, what are they going to track? Sightings.
Right.
And none of these sightings have ever been confirmed as being him.
Yeah, I mean, if this guy now had a full beard, nobody would say, oh, that's the guy that went missing from Newtown, Connecticut.
Especially if he's in somewhere obscure like Wyoming. Sorry for everyone that lives in Wyoming. That's obscure to me in Rhode Island, but, you know, like...
Or, I mean, he could have left the country, too. I mean, he didn't board a flight.
Or got a new identity and ended up with a new
Right,
whatever.
He didn't board a flight. I mean, that's going into the realm of thinking, oh, he planned this and he had all this money put aside and then he spent $20,000 buying a new identity, which I don't think is the case at all.
Yeah.
But there is a possibility that he ran away and that he's been working, you know, as a chef somewhere or... whatever.
Was the psychic right all along?
Perhaps, who knows?
Gotta say it in the spoopy voice. Ooh.
But, I mean, looking at it through the pain of his family, how bad they would feel if he left them. I understand how you can be sympathetic to that and say, I really don't want it to be that he ran away.
Yeah.
As much as you don't want it to be that it was foul play, too.
Of course,
You would rather it be, you know, not of his own volition.
Yeah.
To leave them. I think I've ruled out the portion of him possibly committing suicide.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm right down the middle of he could have left and he could have been the victim of foul play. You have a pattern where he has done this before. You know, he's on this blood pressure medication where one of the side effects could potentially be depression. He's going through all these problems with Max. He just had the issue with the laptops happen. He could have potentially taken that $600 out to go and buy these laptops back from these associates of Max that were probably drug addicts as well. And then he's laying in bed one night and he's like, I am a failure. Just as he thought nearly 20 years prior when he left his family for weeks at a time. And then maybe if he did leave, maybe something bad happened to him after he had left. So that's where it's going to be very difficult for the Newtown Police Department to ever come to some type of conclusion on what happened because he could have just up and left and then, you know, maybe he died in South Carolina. Maybe he died in Florida. Maybe he died in California.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But then the two things that are the biggest sticking points for me are the blood pressure medication and the lack of him taking a vehicle or even potentially shoes.
Yeah, but if he was a hiker and he just, you know...
No. I'm
threw
sorry.
on something and left?
You can't give me an excuse on that. Like no shoes, no car. If he's trying to leave, he's not going to hike away.
Well, no. If you're trying to leave your life behind, you're not going to take anything that can be brought back to you.
But then he also had plans to pick up his wife. I mean, wouldn't you feel like crap being like, I'm just going to leave and I'm just going to leave my wife stranded at the airport? Like,
yeah, it's like you say one thing and you lean one way and then you say something else or you debunk what you just said to lean you towards running away and then you're back at foul play.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, how do you get to foul play? Because there was no, you know, blood or weapons or struggle ever found at the house, and that's where he was last seen, and it doesn't appear that he had left there.
Yeah.
So outside of the possibility of him being, you know, forced into a vehicle at weapon point or lured into a vehicle by a friend or an associate, how do you get to foul play out of the house?
I really don't know, and that's what I'm saying. So I'm sure everybody listening right now is probably in the exact same boat that we are. Either you have a solidified opinion or you're completely ping-ponged back and forth with every single random thing that you think of. And we would love to hear your guys' thoughts. We want you to go comment on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, wherever, and tell us which theory you land on, because this one has boggled my mind. And the research for this one was intense, and this was just a lot. This case has been a lot. So I would really love to hear what you guys think. And, you know, just, I want to chat about it.
Yeah. And if you want, go look at that disappeared episode, listen to this one, go look at that disappeared episode, compare and contrast stuff that we talked about here with what was said in the disappeared episode, and let us know what type of conclusion you come to. Yeah. I would definitely like to see if anyone maybe has an opinion that sways me one way or another. I agree.
And I did just want to mention before we move on to the questions we're left with, because I do have a couple and there's some things that we haven't talked about yet. So I did want to mention, though, that Max was said to be clean and in recovery and had gotten a job nearby when the disappeared episode aired on this case. Yes, that was 2016, so I don't exactly know where he is now, but it seemed like things were, it seemed like he was doing his best to stay clean and,
on the up and up.
Yeah, definitely. And I also wanted to mention that Lori has said that she believes Hoagy is no longer alive. And, I think like us, maybe they kind of don't really know what they think happened either, but at least she's come to the conclusion that she does not think that her husband is alive anymore. So, So on to the questions that were left. Well, I bet you're wondering how we got here. As you heard in our intro, this case blasted its way back into headlines on Wednesday, December 7th, 2022, the day after we released part 1 of Hoagy's case, when the Newtown Police Department released a statement confirming that Robert Hoagland, living under the alias of Richard King, was found deceased in his home in Rock Hill, New York, less than 2 hours from his previous residence in Newtown, Connecticut. It appears as though Hoagy did, in fact, manage to flee his old life while leaving zero evidence behind to indicate where he was going. Using the alias of Richard King, Hoagland is believed to have been living in the New York area since around November of 2013. Based on preliminary reporting, it seems as though he died of natural causes, and foul play appears to not have been a factor. As we stated throughout our coverage of this case, John and I were torn between two options. Could Hoagy have been the victim of foul play, or, for some reason, was he compelled to once again run away from his life and his family? It's not often that we have such swift resolution in the cases we cover, but over the past few weeks, between the Cottingham confessions and now this, it's sure thrown us for a loop. But there are still more cases out there with families yearning for answers, so tune in next week for an all-new episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.